is run by two friends I think I would highlight. One, Morningstar so far from help make quick work.
Our colleagues south of the border recently did a report on the predictive nature of stewardship grades on investor experience. So Brian, why don't we start with talking about how we grade stewardship here at Morningstar?
Well, we launched our grades in 2010 in Canada, and what we've been trying to do is identify those fund companies that have unit holder friendly policies and offer true investments for unit holders, as opposed to just trying to sell gimmicky product, whatever happens to be hot on any given year. And so the methodology is a little bit different from what our colleagues have used in the United States. We took our cue from them in the grading. For one thing, we're actually grading fund companies at the fund company level as opposed to at the fund level, unlike what they're doing in Chicago. And also some of the disclosure on some key elements of the grading methodology, such as manager incentives, whether fund managers invest in the funds that they run. The disclosure isn't as good in Canada as it is in the United States, so there are some caveats when we look at the findings of what the data suggest from the U.S. stewardship grades. But broadly speaking, the methodology is the same, and we're trying to do the same thing, which is to identify those fund companies that put the unit holder first.
Well, what were some of the takeaways from this report?
Well, they were very, very promising. The data suggested that really three areas of the stewardship grades in particular were predictive of good fund holder experiences, notably manager incentives, i.e. the fund managers that eat their own cooking have actually performed better on average on a risk-adjusted basis over the long term, which you would expect because they're putting their money where their mouth is. And whereas if they were offering a product that they didn't really believe in but they thought might sell well, then they might not invest in that. But similarly, fees were a very predictive component. This is very consistent with a lot of the research that we've done in the past. Lower fees lead to better performance. And the other area that our US colleagues did well was the corporate culture grading. Generally speaking, firms that received a better corporate culture grade did provide better risk-adjusted returns over time. And so the U.S. has had these grades since 2004, so that's a lot of data that they can look at least enough where you can start drawing some conclusions. We've only had our grades going since 2010 here in Canada, but we're certainly encouraged by what we see there.
Now, given the differences you outlined earlier, would it be fair to say that the Canadian investor experience will be similar to the U.S. investor experience? I
think it is reasonable. It's also reasonable to maybe poke some holes in aspects of the methodology that are different, such as, I think most notably, the manager incentives component, where we just don't have the same disclosure requirements. So in the U.S., for instance, you can know whether a fund manager has more than $1 million invested in his fund or $250,000 or whatever it may be, whereas in Canada, we don't have any legal disclosure requirements along those lines. So Morningstar will simply poll the firms and ask them, what percentage of your fund managers have greater than 1 year's base salary invested in their funds, and those types of questions. And I do think that those types of questions are basically getting to the same place. But when it's not a legally required disclosure, maybe you can't put as much weight in it. But just given the pretty compelling research that we have so far on not only the manager incentives but fees and the key aspects of corporate culture, having that predictive ability in the US, I really do think it translates well to the Canadian market. And so although it's too early to say whether our grades in Canada will be as effective, it's certainly very encouraging to see the data that's come out of the US.